Hey guys, if you happen to be out here listening to this, thanks for checking it out. I'm going to be going through the Dart language and mobile app development using Flutter. So I really hope if anyone stumbles across these that they maybe help them out. And we're going to be, just trying to improve our skills and work our way through a sample project, hopefully grow our knowledge of Flutter. So yeah, in this first tutorial, first pancake, so bear with me, but I'm going to be covering classes and JSON serialization in Flutter, or in Dart rather, specifically manual serialization. If you jump into the JSON serialization area of the Flutter documentation, they do cover automated serialization, but I think for the learning purposes and for these early tutorials, we'll go over it, doing it the boilerplate way, and then we can explore more automated methods down the line. But in this tutorial, we're going to be exploring classes, constructors, named constructors, and we're going to be creating a user model for our sample application. So in this tutorial, we're taking for granted that you've got an application in Flutter up and running. If you don't, I'll link the documentation on how to start a simple Flutter app. It's pretty easy to spin one up using the command line. Quick note on project organization. So in my library folder, I like to have 4 folders: components, models, router, and views. I think that's fairly straightforward. So today we're going to be jumping into the models folder, and we're going to create our new data model using a fresh class for our user. So the first step is to create a new file. We'll call it user.dart, and that's going to open a new file for us in our IDE. And if we start typing class and we go down, we can see that code completion can do it for us. Oh, I should really turn off Copilot. If you haven't seen Copilot yet, GitHub's AI pair programmer, it's kind of cool. So definitely check it out. But for now, we'll shut that off so we can have a nice clean screen for you guys. So we're gonna name our class user, and voila, done. We've created a class. Fantastic. It's really that easy. But right now our class doesn't do anything. It's empty. It's just an empty object. And we want to add some functionality to this class. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to assign some values to that class. So the way you assign values to a class is to use what's called a constructor. And in Dart, a constructor is created by creating a function that has the same name as our class. So right now, our class has a constructor. That constructor, however, is empty. So we want to pass it some named parameters. And those named parameters are going to be ID, name, oh, want commas there, and so where I'm getting that information, we know eventually our data is going to be coming from Firebase for this sample project, and throughout these tutorials we'll use Firebase fairly heavily. And so I've gone in the dashboard and created a new empty database and created a single user manually within the context of the dashboard. And I've just added a field named Nick. And of course, it already has a document ID that you can see here that is generated. So those are our 2 fields that we're going to start with, a very simple class. But you can see the compiler is already complaining. So the reason the compiler is complaining, although we have told the constructor it needs to pull in these values when you are creating a new object from this class, we haven't given it anywhere to put them. So we need to create a couple finals, and we're going to call, they're going to both be strings because those are the types of values that we have in our database. So the name and the document ID are both a string, and because Dart is strongly typed, we'll want to include those. So this string ID, great, and the same thing here. Name. Too easy. So one thing the compiler is also complaining about here is the fact that we've told it that there may or may not be a value for these because we haven't marked these fields as required. But our string here is a required object. We haven't made it optional by appending a question mark to the end. So we can fix that compiler issue by making this field nullable, or we can tell the compiler that this field is in fact required. Ooh, required. So we're actually going to add, make the name string nullable, and we're going to keep the ID as required because we're always going to have a document ID, sorry, but we won't necessarily have a name until we gather that information from our user. So you can see we've created our new class in Dart. Congratulations. So if we move over to any one of our views, and so in your boilerplate app, if you've generated yours from the CLI, you will have app.dart. We've got a little bit more stuff in there. So if I go into my views folder and I just pick one of my views, it doesn't really matter which one. Let's do one. Yeah, there's hardly any junk in here. So if I go in here and I start typing user, you can see we've got already the compiler is trying to autocomplete for us, and it will automatically import our new model user into the file simply by hitting enter. And then we can create that object by providing the required ID string. And that's a valid object because there is no name required. But if we do put a comma, we have the option to add a name, call it Jane. And we can assign that to final, so that we can reuse it throughout our view. So now if I went into text, and here we said user.id, that's a string. Leave null. That's why. Great, so we had to remove that constant value simply because we're now providing this with a value that could be potentially variable. And so the compile time constant needs to be removed, and it can be replaced by the runtime constant, also called final in Dart. Yep, and then we can call that value. So yeah, pretty cool how we can now use the values on that class anywhere we want. So we'll just put this back to what it was. And if we go back into our user class, one thing that we know is when the information comes back from Firebase, it's not going to be in this nice little user package that we've just created. We're going to get a string of JSON back from Firebase, and in order to use that within the context of our Flutter application and in the Dart language, that information needs to be typed. So we can't use that arbitrary string of data in our application. We need to convert it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a named constructor. And so a named constructor is simply another constructor function, and it uses dot notation to effectively create another method that we can use to initialize our class. So we're going to call this one from JSON, and from JSON is going to be a function that's going to take a map, which is the Dart word for array, and it's going to have potential values of string and dynamic, and we're going to pass it an arbitrary name for that value. That's JSON. So all we're saying to Dart is we want to create a user the same way we are in the standard constructor, but we're going to be doing it using a function, and that function is going to take a value called JSON of type map with a string and dynamic type as the values within the context of that map. So then we provide the constructor with a colon, and then we can say the name of our value, so ID, and we're going to call it the JSON parameter from our constructor function, and we're going to say ID. And then we're also going to say name equals JSON name. Save. Oh, don't forget our semicolon, and voila. So this named constructor is going to empower us to not only create an object of this class from values that we supply, but also from a JSON string that we supply it. And that's going to be really handy. Moving forward, we can update this class to include any new fields that we may add to our data model, and eventually down the road we'll go through how to suck in another map and have a map as a sub field on the user model. So for instance, if we wanted, say, an array of, I don't know, baseball cards that you own, doesn't matter. Yeah, we can also do the same thing and create type-safe objects in an array as a field on the user class. But yeah, that's it. That was the first pancake, guys. I hope this helped someone out there in the universe and helped you understand a little bit more about named constructors and what they can be used for. And yeah, we'll see you next time. Cheers.